Did medieval women just sit around embroidering tapestries and waiting for knights? Were their lives only about cooking dinner and having babies between the years 500 and 1500? Number one, medieval women had no economic power or independent businesses. The idea that medieval women were entirely dependent on men for their economic survival, confined solely to domestic duties without any independent means, is a picture that often dominates popular understanding. This portrayal suggests a world where business, trade, and economic enterprise were exclusively male domains. The truth, however, paints a far more vibrant and diverse picture, revealing women as active, essential, and often independent players in the complex economic landscape of the Middle Ages. From bustling market stalls to powerful workshops, women were deeply embedded in the commercial life of towns and villages, running enterprises that contributed significantly to the medieval economy. Take the world of brewing, for example. In many medieval communities, ale was not just a drink, it was a staple of the diet, a source of calories and hydration that was often safer to consume than water. And who brewed much of this ale? Women. Brewsters, as they were known, were ubiquitous figures in towns and rural areas across Europe. These were not just women brewing for their families, they were producing ale for sale, operating highly profitable businesses. Records from English towns like Norwich and Coventry, or French cities such as Paris, show numerous women listed as brewers, contributing to the town's economy through their trade and often paying taxes on their production. A woman might operate a brewing operation from her home, transforming grain into a marketable product, selling it directly to consumers, or supplying local taverns. They understood the market, managed their supplies, and often employed assistants. The tools of their trade are large cauldrons, fermenting vats, and malt mills were a testament to their commercial enterprise. Some brewsters achieved considerable success, expanding their operations and becoming significant figures in their local economies. Their presence was so widespread that the stereotypical image of a medieval alewife, with her distinctive cap and often her cat, became a recognized symbol of urban life. These women were not just making a little extra money, they were running full-fledged businesses that were integral to the daily life and economic health of their communities. Their role was so prominent that local authorities often created specific regulations for brewsters, governing the quality and price of ale, further cementing their status as recognized business owners. Beyond ale, medieval women were deeply involved in the production and sale of textiles. The wool and cloth industry was arguably the most significant economic force in many parts of Europe, particularly in Flanders, Italy, and England. While men often handled the finishing and selling of high-value cloths, women performed a vast majority of the labor-intensive initial stages. Spinning was almost exclusively a female occupation, and the word spinster itself, originally simply meaning a woman who spun, later became synonymous with an unmarried woman, highlighting how central this occupation was to a woman's economic identity. Women spun wool into yarn using distaffs and spindles, or later spinning wheels. This yarn was then sold or woven into cloth. Reweaving, too, was often a female craft, particularly for linen and coarser woolens, and women frequently operated looms within their homes, creating fabrics for sale. Dyer women also existed, applying vibrant colors to finished textiles. In cities like Ghent, Florence, or London, some women moved beyond individual production, organizing small workshops where they oversaw other women, effectively managing a portion of the textile production chain. They bought raw materials, directed the labor of others, and found markets for their finished goods. These were entrepreneurial endeavors requiring capital, management skills, and market knowledge. Their participation in this key industry demonstrates a direct and substantial contribution to the medieval economy, extending far beyond simple household chores. Consider also the role of women in the food industry. Bakers were often women, producing bread not just for their families but for entire communities. They kneaded dough, stoked ovens, and sold loaves from their bakeries or market stalls. In Bologna, Italy, regulations for bakers mention women operating their own bakeries. Fishmongers, selling fresh or preserved fish in coastal towns and inland markets, were frequently women. Records from medieval London show women as prominent fish sellers, managing their stalls and negotiating prices. Butchers, though perhaps less common for women, also included some female proprietors, especially in smaller towns. Spice merchants, dealing in highly valuable imported goods, also saw female participation. These women were not merely assistants, they were the primary figures managing these businesses, responsible for sourcing goods, production, sales, and often the apprentices or servants who assisted them. They operated in a competitive environment requiring keen business acumen and a deep understanding of supply and demand. The urban landscape provided many opportunities for women to engage in commerce. Many women ran taverns and inns, providing lodging, food, and drink to travelers and locals alike. These establishments were often significant social hubs and economic enterprises. An innkeeper woman was responsible for managing staff, maintaining the premises, stocking provisions, and handling finances. They might have a team of servants and hostesses working for them, making their businesses complex operations. Some women operated shops selling a wide variety of goods, from cloth and haberdashery to candles and everyday provisions. These mercer women, as they were sometimes called, were integral to the retail sector, interacting directly with customers and managing their inventory. And documents from medieval Paris, for instance, describe women involved in various trades, including glove makers, purse makers, and even armorers' wives who took an active role in the family business, sometimes continuing it after their husband's death. Widows, in particular, often found themselves in positions of significant economic independence. Upon the death of their husbands, they frequently inherited the family business, property, and capital. Unlike married women, who were often legally subsumed under their husband's identity in many legal systems, feme covert, widows gained the legal status of feme sole, meaning they could conduct business, enter into contracts, and sue or be sued independently. This legal autonomy allowed countless widows to continue and often expand the family trade. They might manage a vast estate, oversee a large merchant enterprise, or run a thriving craft workshop. Our guild records, though often male-dominated, sometimes show widows retaining their husband's guild membership or even being admitted in their own right, enabling them to continue the trade and enjoy its protections and privileges. These women were not just holding the fort until a male heir came of age. They were often leading the businesses themselves for decades, proving their capability as economic agents. The world of finance also saw women playing a role, though perhaps less prominently than in physical trades. And women lent money, sometimes formally and sometimes informally, to individuals or even small businesses. Records of loans and debts often show women as creditors. While large-scale banking was predominantly male, smaller-scale lending was a way for women with capital to generate income and exert economic influence. This highlights that women, when they had access to resources, were just as capable of engaging in financial transactions and entrepreneurial ventures as men. In conclusion, the narrative of medieval women being economically powerless and confined to non-commercial domesticity crumbles under the weight of historical evidence. From brewsters and bakers to textile producers, market sellers, innkeepers, and financially independent widows, women were vibrant, active participants in the medieval economy. They owned businesses, managed resources, employed others, and contributed essential goods and services. Their work was not merely supplementary, but fundamental to the functioning and prosperity of medieval society, showcasing a dynamic female economic presence often overlooked by traditional narratives. Their stories are woven into the very fabric of medieval commerce, demonstrating a remarkable degree of agency and entrepreneurial spirit. Number 2, medieval women were always subservient and voiceless. A common perception of medieval women places them in a position of perpetual subservience, devoid of any real voice or agency within society. This view often presents them as meek, silent figures, entirely subject to the whims of fathers, husbands, or brothers, with no capacity to influence decisions or express their own will. However, historical records reveal a far more complex reality, showing women exercising significant power, wielding influence in various spheres, and speaking out in ways that shape their communities and even kingdoms. While societal structures often placed limitations on women, they found numerous avenues through which to assert their authority, express their opinions, and participate actively in the shaping of their world. Perhaps the most visible examples of female power come from the highest echelons of society, queens and noblewomen. The queens were not just decorative consorts, many were powerful political figures, acting as regents for minor sons, ruling in their own right, or serving as crucial advisors to their husbands. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most remarkable figures of the 12th century, ruled one of the wealthiest and most powerful territories in France and later became Queen of England. She led crusades, negotiated treaties, and actively participated in political intrigues and governance. Her influence was immense, shaping the destinies of 2 major European powers. Similarly, Blanche of Castile, regent for her son Louis IX of France, proved to be an incredibly shrewd and effective ruler, suppressing rebellions, negotiating peace treaties, and ensuring the stability of the kingdom during her son's minority. These women were not voiceless. Their decisions affected millions, and their decrees were law. They presided over courts, commanded armies, and managed vast estates, demonstrating political acumen and strong leadership. Their authority stemmed not just from their lineage, but from their intelligence and force of personality. And beyond queens, aristocratic women often held significant sway within their households and beyond. The lady of a castle or manor, particularly when her husband was away at war or court, was often responsible for managing the entire estate, which could be a massive economic and administrative undertaking. This included overseeing agricultural production, managing servants and tenants, collecting rents, administering justice in local courts, and even defending the castle if necessary. Such responsibilities required considerable administrative skill, authority, and the ability to command respect. Noblewomen frequently engaged in extensive correspondence discussing political matters, family alliances, and economic affairs. Their letters are filled with their thoughts, opinions, and instructions, demonstrating a clear and articulate voice. They were also key players in the complex web of medieval patronage, supporting artists, writers, and scholars, and thereby influencing cultural trends and intellectual discourse. Within the religious sphere, abbesses held immense power and influence. These women led wealthy and prestigious convents, often managing vast landholdings, numerous tenants, and significant financial resources. An abbess was effectively the spiritual and temporal head of her community, responsible for its spiritual well-being, its economic prosperity, and its external relations. They engaged in legal disputes, negotiated with powerful bishops and secular lords, and often commissioned impressive building projects. Figures like Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German abbess, was not only a powerful spiritual leader, but also a renowned mystic, philosopher, composer, and scientific writer whose counsel was sought by emperors, popes, and kings. Her prolific writings and correspondence showcase a woman who was anything but voiceless, actively engaging with the intellectual and political currents of her time. Abbesses often presided over self-governing communities, providing a space where women could exercise leadership and intellectual pursuits in a way that was often unavailable in secular society. In urban settings, women also found avenues to exert influence. While guilds were often male-dominated, wives of guild masters frequently worked alongside their husbands, learning the trade and becoming integral to the business. Upon widowhood, as mentioned before, many women inherited the right to continue the business and, crucially, to maintain their husband's guild membership. This meant they participated in guild meetings, had a say in guild regulations, and exercised the economic and social power that came with such membership. Records from places like Cologne or Nuremberg show women admitted to guilds, sometimes even as masters, allowing them a formal voice in the regulation of their trade. These women were not passive. They actively contributed to the economic and social governance of their crafts. Beyond formal structures, women exercised influence through their social roles and networks. They were key figures in community life, often mediating disputes, caring for the sick, and organizing local festivities. Their informal networks of support and communication were vital for the functioning of medieval society. In courtrooms, women frequently appeared as plaintiffs, defendants, and witnesses, articulating their cases and defending their rights. Manorial court rolls, for example, reveal numerous instances of women bringing grievances, engaging in land disputes, or testifying on behalf of others. Their voices, recorded by scribes, show them actively participating in the legal system and asserting their claims. While the legal system might have been biased in some ways, women were not entirely excluded from seeking justice or protecting their interests. Even in literature and spiritual writings, women's voices emerged. While most medieval authors were men, a significant number of women became prominent writers, poets, and mystics. Christine de Pizan, a 15th century author, wrote extensively on political theory, women's history, and moral philosophy. Her Book of the City of Ladies is a powerful defense of women and their capabilities, directly challenging misogynistic views of her time. Marjorie Kempe, a 15th century English mystic, dictated an autobiography that provides a unique and raw insight into a woman's spiritual journey, her travels, and her interactions with ecclesiastical authorities. These women were not silent. They used the written word to express complex ideas, challenge norms, and record their experiences, reaching audiences far beyond their immediate circles. In various social strata, women engaged in subtle yet potent forms of resistance and influence. They might use gossip, social pressure, or appeals to community norms to enforce desired behaviors or challenge perceived injustices. While direct political power might have been limited for most ordinary women, their collective actions, their roles in maintaining community cohesion, and their daily negotiations within households and marketplaces all represented forms of agency. Their opinions, particularly on matters concerning their families, their children, and their daily lives, held considerable weight within their immediate spheres. The notion of women being entirely subservient and voiceless is therefore a simplification that ignores the multifaceted ways they asserted themselves, influenced their surroundings, and left their mark on the historical record. From the throne to the market stall, medieval women, far from being silent shadows, were active participants and formidable voices in their world. Number 3, medieval women were uneducated and illiterate. The prevailing image of medieval women often portrays them as largely uneducated, confined to domestic spheres, without access to books, schooling, or intellectual pursuits. This widespread assumption suggests that literacy and formal learning were almost exclusively the domain of men, particularly clergy and some noblemen. However, a deeper examination of medieval society reveals a far more nuanced reality, demonstrating that while literacy rates were indeed lower than in modern times for both genders, women did have various avenues for education, ranging from practical skills to advanced scholarly pursuits, and many achieved levels of literacy that enabled them to participate actively in intellectual, administrative, and economic life. Formal schooling, as we understand it today, was rare for most people, regardless of gender, during the Middle Ages. Education was often vocational or required within specific institutional settings. For women, especially those from the nobility, religious orders, or prosperous urban families, opportunities for learning certainly existed. Noble daughters often received an education that went beyond simple household management. Tutors were employed to teach them reading, writing, arithmetic, and sometimes even Latin or French, especially if they were destined for marriage alliances in foreign courts or for managing large estates. This education was practical, preparing them for the administrative demands of running a complex household, which often involved managing numerous servants, overseeing extensive landholdings, and handling intricate financial accounts. A lady of a manor needed to be literate to correspond with merchants, collect rents, and keep meticulous records. Surviving letters and household accounts written by noblewomen attest to their literacy and administrative competence. Convents played a particularly crucial role in female education. For women who chose a religious life, or whose families sent them to convents for schooling, these institutions functioned as centers of learning. Nuns were expected to read and understand religious texts, requiring literacy in Latin, the liturgical language. Many convents maintained impressive libraries, and nuns often engaged in copying manuscripts, illuminating texts, and even composing their own works. The scriptoria of convents were significant centers of book production, with nuns acting as skilled scribes and artists. Hildegard of Bingen, mentioned previously, is a prime example of a highly educated nun who produced extensive theological, scientific, and musical works. Rotswit of Gandersheim, a 10th century canoness, wrote plays, poems, and histories, demonstrating a profound classical education. These women were not just literate, they were scholars and intellectuals, contributing to the intellectual life of their time. The education offered in convents provided women with an environment where intellectual curiosity was fostered and scholarship was valued, offering an alternative to the expectations of secular domestic life. In urban centers, the growth of trade and commerce also fostered a different kind of literacy for women. Wives and daughters of merchants and craftsmen often needed to be literate to assist in the family business. This practical literacy involved reading account books, keeping inventories, writing letters to clients or suppliers, and calculating prices. A merchant's wife might manage the shop, take orders, and handle financial transactions, all of which benefited greatly from the ability to read and write. Guild records and court documents sometimes refer to women who could read and write, indicating that this skill was not uncommon among prosperous urban women. For example, some women worked as scribes or illuminators in urban workshops, contributing to the burgeoning book trade. These were skilled professionals who required a high degree of literacy and artistic talent. Women also served as notaries or clerks in some areas, handling legal documents that demanded advanced literacy. Even among ordinary women, some level of literacy was not impossible. While full literacy, involving both reading and writing, was less common, the ability to read might have been more widespread than typically assumed. Access to devotional texts, like psalters or books of hours, encouraged reading among the pious. These personal prayer books were often richly illuminated and passed down through generations, becoming cherished possessions. While the extent of reading might have varied from rote memorization to full comprehension, it nonetheless represents engagement with written material. Furthermore, women in certain roles, such as midwives or healers, might have needed to read texts related to their practices, such as medical treatises or herbals. The very existence of female authors further challenges the notion of widespread female illiteracy. Christine de Pizan, an educated woman living in 14th and 15th century France, supported herself and her family through her writing after being widowed. Her works are not only extensive, but also demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of history, philosophy, and politics. She was a professional writer, a testament to her high level of education and literacy. Marjorie Kempe, though dictated her autobiography, shows that stories and experiences of women were considered valuable enough to be recorded in written form, even if the woman herself was not a skilled scribe. The demand for such narratives implies an audience that was either literate or eager to hear such stories read aloud. It is crucial to remember that illiteracy, in the medieval context, did not always mean a complete inability to engage with written culture. Oral culture remained extremely strong, and many learned through listening to sermons, stories, and public readings. However, even within this oral context, the ability to read and write provided distinct advantages and opened doors to greater participation in various aspects of society. The stereotype of the universally uneducated medieval woman fails to acknowledge the rich tapestry of learning experiences available to different women based on their social status, location, and individual circumstances. From the scholarly nuns in their cloisters to the diligent merchant's wife managing her accounts, medieval women found ways to acquire and apply literacy and knowledge, playing active roles in the intellectual and administrative life of their communities. Number 4, medieval women had no legal rights or property. A prevalent misconception about medieval women is that they possessed no legal rights and were entirely incapable of owning or controlling property. This view often paints a picture of women as mere chattels, legally invisible and economically powerless, completely subject to male authority. While it is true that medieval legal systems often favored men and placed significant restrictions on women, particularly married women, it is inaccurate to claim they had no rights or access to property. The reality was far more intricate, varying significantly across different regions, time periods, and social classes, with many women holding, inheriting, managing, and even defending substantial property and engaging in legal proceedings. One of the most significant legal rights for medieval women was the concept of dower. Upon marriage, a woman was typically entitled to a dower, which was a portion of her husband's land or property designated for her support should she become a widow. This was usually 1/3 of his real estate, though it could vary. This dower was not simply a gift, it was a legal right that could not be alienated by her husband without her consent. If her husband died, she had a legal claim to this property for the rest of her life. This meant that widows often became substantial landowners, managing their dower lands, collecting rents, and exercising the rights associated with land ownership. These dower lands provided widows with economic security and a degree of independence, allowing them to remain self-sufficient and sometimes even to exert significant local influence. Records from manorial courts across England, for instance, frequently show widows bringing cases to defend their dower rights or participating in legal disputes concerning their inherited properties. Inheritance laws also provided women with avenues to acquire property. While primogeniture, where the eldest son inherited everything, was common for noble families, many other inheritance customs existed. In some regions, daughters could inherit equally with sons, especially if there were no male heirs. Furthermore, women often inherited personal property, such as household goods, jewelry, and money, through their parents' or other relatives' wills. These wills often stipulated specific bequests to daughters, sisters, or other female kin, providing them with assets that could be used for their livelihood or invested. In some towns and cities, particularly in southern Europe, urban customary law often granted women more extensive property rights than rural common law. For example, in parts of Italy, women could own and manage their dowry property independently, even when married, and could dispose of it as they wished. This provided a significant economic base and a degree of financial autonomy that was often absent for married women in other regions. The legal status of feme sole for unmarried women and widows was a crucial aspect of their property rights. Unlike married women feme covert, who were legally subsumed under their husband's identity and generally could not own property or enter contracts independently, a single woman or a widow was considered legally independent. This meant she could own land, buy and sell property, enter into contracts, borrow and lend money, and represent herself in court. As discussed previously, many widows took over and managed their deceased husband's businesses, requiring them to have full legal capacity to engage in commercial transactions, sign agreements, and manage finances. Court records throughout medieval Europe are replete with instances of women, particularly widows, appearing as litigants in property disputes, debt cases, and other legal matters, demonstrating their active engagement with the legal system and their right to protect their assets. In certain specific circumstances, even married women could hold property separately from their husbands. This might be through prenuptial agreements where property was settled on the wife for her sole use. Such agreements were more common among wealthy families seeking to protect assets or ensure a wife's financial security. Furthermore, in some jurisdictions, a married woman could enter into business agreements or hold property independently if she was acting as a feme sole merchant, especially if her husband was absent or unable to manage affairs. This was more prevalent in bustling trading centers where women played vital roles in commerce and needed the legal standing to conduct their business effectively. Beyond formal legal rights, women also exercised informal control over property and resources within their households. While the husband might have been the legal head of the household, the wife often managed the daily finances, oversaw servants, controlled the distribution of food and goods, and made decisions about the household's productive activities. In an agricultural setting, the wife often managed the dairy, poultry, and vegetable gardens, producing crucial foodstuffs for the family and often for sale. These were economic activities that she effectively controlled, even if the land was legally held by her husband. Her management and labor directly contributed to the family's wealth and survival, giving her a significant de facto influence over property use. Even in situations where women's rights were restricted, they found ways to navigate the legal system to their advantage. They might use male relatives as proxies in legal transactions, or they might rely on customary law, which often provided more flexibility than formal common law. Women, both noble and common, petitioned kings, popes, and local authorities, seeking justice or special dispensations related to their property. The records of these petitions show women actively seeking to protect their interests and utilize available legal channels. The idea that medieval women had no legal rights or property is a sweeping generalization that obscures a more intricate reality. While their rights were certainly not equivalent to men's and varied greatly by location and status, women exercised dower rights, inherited property, held independent legal status as single women and widows, and often controlled significant economic assets, both formally and informally. Their constant presence in legal documents as landowners, litigants, and economic agents is a testament to their active engagement with and participation in the medieval legal and property systems. Number 5, medieval women only did domestic chores. The persistent image of medieval women confined exclusively to the hearth and home, their days solely filled with cooking, cleaning, child-rearing, and perhaps a bit of embroidery, is a deeply ingrained fiction. This narrow portrayal suggests that women's labor was entirely distinct from the public, productive economy, existing only within the private sphere of the household. While domestic responsibilities were undoubtedly a significant part of many women's lives, this simplification profoundly undervalues the immense and diverse range of work performed by medieval women, much of which was integral to the broader economy and often physically demanding. From the fields to the marketplaces, and from skilled crafts to professional services, women's labor was fundamental to the functioning and prosperity of medieval society. Agriculture was the backbone of the medieval economy, and women were indispensable to it. Life in rural areas meant constant, often backbreaking labor for everyone in the family, regardless of gender. Women worked alongside men in the fields, performing a variety of tasks essential for survival and food production. They were involved in plowing, sowing seeds, weeding crops, and especially harvesting. During harvest season, the entire family, including women and children, would toil long hours to bring in the crops, which was a critical period for survival. Women also managed kitchen gardens, cultivating vegetables and herbs for both household consumption and sale. They were central to animal husbandry, caring for livestock such as chickens, ducks, pigs, and dairy cows. Milking, making cheese and butter, and processing animal products were predominantly female tasks. These were not mere hobbies, they were vital contributions to the family's food supply, and often a source of income through the sale of surplus products at local markets. Manorial records and agricultural treatises often depict women working in the fields, proving their active and physical involvement in the primary sector of the medieval economy. Beyond direct agricultural labor, women transformed raw materials into usable goods, a process often considered domestic, but with significant economic implications. The textile industry, as mentioned, was heavily reliant on female labor. Spinning fiber into yarn was an almost exclusively female occupation, often done during any spare moment, whether sitting by the fire or walking. This yarn was then woven into cloth, a task often performed by women in their homes or in workshops. Dyeing thread or cloth also saw female participation. These textile activities, whether for household use or sale, were productive economic endeavors, providing clothing for the family and valuable goods for trade. Women were the primary producers of one of Europe's most important commodities. Food processing was another area where women's domestic work overlapped entirely with commercial enterprise. Women were the primary bakers of bread for their households, but many also operated as professional bakers, selling their loaves to the community. They ran bakehouses, managed ovens, and bought grain to turn into this essential staple. Similarly, brewing ale was a widespread female occupation, as already detailed, producing a vital commodity for daily consumption and trade. These were not just household tasks, they were often the basis of thriving businesses, with women managing production, sales, and finances. They also preserved food through drying, salting, and pickling, ensuring provisions for the lean months, a skill that contributed to the economic stability of the household. In urban centers, women were deeply involved in various crafts and trades. They worked as mercers, selling cloth, haberdashers, selling small wares, and fishmongers selling fresh seafood. The women operated stalls and markets, selling eggs, butter, cheese, poultry, and produce that they often raised or prepared themselves. They were often the face of retail trade, interacting directly with customers and managing sales. Some women specialized in more intricate crafts. The records show women working as goldsmiths, embroiderers, parchment makers, candle makers, and even working with leather and metals. They might run these businesses independently or as part of a family enterprise where they played an active and indispensable role alongside their husbands. The skills required for these crafts were often extensive, demanding years of apprenticeship and mastery. Service industries also saw significant female participation. Women worked as laundresses, cleaners, wet nurses, and domestic servants in wealthy households. They were crucial to the functioning of inns and taverns, often running the entire establishment or managing the kitchen and guest services. Prostitution, while often coerced and exploitative, was also a form of work for many women in medieval towns, sometimes even organized and taxed by municipal authorities. Midwifery was a professional skill highly valued and exclusively practiced by women, requiring extensive knowledge of anatomy and medical procedures. Women also worked as healers and apothecaries, using knowledge of herbs and traditional remedies to treat illnesses, often gaining significant reputations within their communities. Even in high-status environments, women performed administrative and managerial roles that went far beyond simple domesticity. Noblewomen often managed vast estates in their husband's absence, overseeing agricultural production, collecting rents, managing large staffs of servants, and handling complex financial accounts. These were large-scale administrative operations requiring sophisticated management skills and a deep understanding of economic realities. Abbesses, as mentioned, managed significant monastic landholdings and financial resources, effectively running large ecclesiastical organizations that functioned as major economic and social entities. The idea that medieval women only did domestic chores is a gross simplification that ignores the immense scope and economic importance of their labor. Women were integral to agriculture, textile production, food processing, skilled crafts, retail trade, and various service professions. Their work was not confined to the private sphere. It was often publicly visible, economically productive, and essential for the survival and prosperity of families and communities. The medieval economy, in all its facets, relied profoundly on the tireless and varied efforts of women, who were active, vital, and often entrepreneurial contributors to their world.